This here is the GTX 465, now a reasonably old graphics card from Nvidia released back in 2010. In the previous video I briefly showed this card inserted into the i7-4790K plus RX 6600 test system before I removed it. This weird, nearly forbidden AMD and Nvidia dual GPU setup is how I actually use this system in real life. The ancient GTX 465 really lacks in the modern API department, with only properly supporting up to DirectX 11 plus some very minimal DirectX 12 support and no Vulkan support to speak of. Thus, it is nearly useless in a modern context, and the lack of Vulkan support basically makes it useless in a Linux gaming machine. But it does have some old hidden features that we can use this card for. The first feature is support for 32-bit PhysX effects that were somewhat popular in games from around 2009 up to 2013. The second feature is an actually good quality analog signal output that can properly drive a CRT monitor at high refresh rates and high resolutions. You would be surprised how expensive a good quality digital to analog signal converter can be for modern graphics cards that lack any analog output. So buying a cheap old GPU with proper analog output can be a viable alternative to a good quality converter. And yes, I am using the 2 Molex to 6-pin PCIe adapter, but hey, at least it's not 12-volt high power cable. This video is not really meant to be a benchmark video, rather I wanted to showcase this hybrid system where the AMD card handles the raster rendering while the Nvidia card handles the 32-bit hardware accelerated PhysX calculations. The operating system of choice, Windows 11, can actually handle the graphics pass-through from one card to the other with very little issues when plugged into the CRT. The real headache was getting PhysX to just work on any Nvidia GPU. The process can sometimes just work by enabling the option from the game menu, but more often than not you would need to go into the game installation folder and rename some of the included PhysX.dll files. And sometimes, no matter what you do, PhysX will just refuse to work, or it will claim to have been enabled but run on the CPU and just drop your frame rate. If you decide to replicate this weird setup, you need to plug in the monitor briefly into the GTX 465 to be able to launch the Nvidia control panel, then select the Nvidia card as the dedicated PhysX accelerator. After that, you can plug the monitor back into the main card, in my case the RX 6600. For the PhysX portion of this video, the monitor I'm using is a standard LCD monitor that is plugged into the RX 6600 using a standard HDMI cable. Let us start the PhysX showcase with a rather excellent implementation of the technology with Batman Arkham Asylum using the good old Unreal Engine 3. The PhysX option in this game worked without any fuss, and as you can see in the side-by-side comparison that the game uses it for some excellent atmospheric effects. MSI Afterburner is able to show us the usage of both graphics cards. GPU 1 is the RX 6600 and GPU 2 is the GTX 465. And since we can see that GPU 2 is being utilized in the PhysX On showcase, then we can be sure that the hardware accelerated PhysX is actually working properly. The intro showcases us the cloth or flag physics, the gorgeous interactive fog effects, and we also have ambient interactive paper debris that flies around. And keep in mind, this is just the intro, there may be newer effects further into the game. This is one title that I sure would want PhysX to be on when I'm playing it. Also, let's quickly take a look at the sequel, Arkham City, which again uses the Unreal 3 engine. I had zero issues when enabling PhysX, it just worked, which is a nice bonus. And from the side-by-side comparison using the benchmark included in the game, we get to see some fancy interactive particle effects, again interactive fog, interactive leaves and papers that fly around, and finally these cool ice shards that splinter and fly all over the place. Similar to Arkham Asylum, I would personally want to have PhysX enabled when playing Arkham City. Our second PhysX showcase is Mafia 2, which uses its own proprietary illusion game engine. The game had this weird crashing problem that might be related to Windows 11, but using the 4GB patch on the game and rename the PhysX loader.dll fixed the problem for me. The in-game benchmark features the debris effects that are calculated via hardware-accelerated PhysX very prominently. The effect adds quite some ferocity to firefights, and in my humble opinion, Mafia 2 is one of the games that benefits quite a bit from the PhysX implementation. Next up is Borderlands 2, another Unreal Engine 3 title, which ran perfectly fine out of the box with regards to PhysX. I still went and applied the 4GB patch and also DXVK Vulkan translation layer to fix the god-awful performance problems of the original DirectX 9 version of the game, which coincidentally shows us that this hybrid setup works with Vulkan even though the GTX 465 doesn't support Vulkan. It just handles the PhysX calculations and the RX 6600 handles the modern Vulkan renderer. For PhysX effects, we have some rather impressive explosion and particle effects, debris that scatters around on impact, cloth and flags that interact with the wind and weapons, and also, for the time, nice looking gooey, blobby liquid physics that are part of some elemental weapon effects. While PhysX adds quite a bit of eye candy and certainly makes the explosive weapons look amazing, the sheer chaos and effects that can happen in the late game can bring frame rate down quite a bit. So maybe during the late game you might want to turn down the PhysX effects just a little bit. And here is our first failed attempt at getting PhysX to work inside a game, Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag. The issue here is that when I set the RX 6600 as the main rendering video card, the game locks me out of the option to enable PhysX in the settings. When the rendering card is the GTX 465, the option appears in the menu. So I think Black Flag is hard-coded to only run PhysX on dual Nvidia GPU setups. Maybe someone smarter than me knows how to trick the game into thinking the RX 6600 is an era-appropriate GTX card, but that is sadly above my skill set. Next up, an FPS classic, we have here Metro 2033, which at first glance doesn't seem to have PhysX effects. Playing the benchmarks side by side, I could only see some debris effects and maybe some interactive smoke? I'm not really sure. Just to make sure, I hopped into a level and tried to spot the differences. PhysX most certainly adds some debris effects to weapon impacts, and explosive seems to release interactive smoke. All other smoke effects in-game seems to be handled outside of PhysX, so 2033 only adds very minor eye candy and honestly is one title that I could barely see any difference between on and off. The sequel, Metro Last Light, is also similar. I could barely notice some weapon debris effects and maybe some slightly different smoke effects from explosions, but nothing too major. Here is another Unreal Engine 3 classic, which makes me think there probably was a standard Unreal Engine 3 PhysX plugin because so many of these games have the Unreal Engine 3 in common. Anyway, Mirror's Edge gave me a ton of issues. PhysX only worked initially on the CPU. Renaming some of the PhysX files in the game directory solved that problem. Then I got the hardware accelerated PhysX. Next, I used a community mod for the game called Mirror's Edge Tweak to set the PhysX update rate to 60 FPS. Otherwise, it only updates around at 30 FPS, which looks weird when the game itself is running at 60 or even higher. In-game, we get some really nice interactive glass debris and some interactive cloth and other elements. The breaking glass effect looks quite impressive for its time and honestly is the best eye candy effect that PhysX adds to this game and is used to great effect throughout most of the levels. Here's another Unreal Engine 3 title that I'm sure everyone forgot that even existed, XCOM The Bureau, a Mass Effect 2 clone. To my knowledge, the game adds only weapon effects and particles to explosions. I was only able to briefly test the plasma weaponry and grenades on my last save game from a decade ago. The effects certainly looks neat, but the performance impact is horrible and nearly makes the game unplayable in my personal opinion. Unfortunately, Fallout 4 is our fail number 2. It is supposed to have weapon debris option, but similar to Black Flag, it just does not show up when the RX 6600 is the main rendering card. I also read online that the effect is broken for Nvidia cards after the 700 series. So I was curious if the 400 series card would be able to render them properly. Alas, it was not to be. Here's one game that caught me off guard, Alice the Madness Returns. Yet another Unreal Engine 3 title that uses the PhysX eye candy to great effect, much like Batman. We get to have items on the ground that scatter, we get cloth physics, falling leaves that are interactive with the player, and enemies leave around us inky goo that uses the liquid physics effect, similar to Borderlands 2. On top of all that, the game seems to be a fun action platformer that I will probably play to completion on this machine with all the eye candy enabled. The only downsides are that the game is capped to 30 frames per second and the near mandatory gamepad requirement. Oh, and also the game did crash when enabling PhysX. I think I solved it by renaming the PhysX core.dll file. And last, we have Cryostasis, which is supposed to have some really neat water effects using PhysX. The initial problem that I encountered was just launching the game itself. Turns out the game requires a really old version of PhysX that you need to download from Nvidia's website. And this is where I ran into the second problem. The website download link is just broken. Thankfully, a Reddit post kindly pointed out that you can just force the download by right-clicking and saving the file manually. Once the old legacy PhysX drivers were installed, I was able to get into the game, but changing any graphics settings caused a hard crash. But I solved that as well. It turns out it was the MSI Afterburner and OBS recording combination that was causing the crash. Just disable those, enable the PhysX settings, get into the game again, and then start recording. And once we get into the game, we can see that we are not using the GTX 465 for PhysX at all. The usage of the card is stuck at 0%. I'm not even sure what is supposed to be the PhysX effects in the game. Maybe these flags at the start are using the cloth physics? Proceeding a little bit into the intro of the game, the blizzard scene just tanks the FPS, and I think that's where some physics particles are being run on the CPU, which causes the drops. I also briefly tried running the game fully on the GTX 465 to see if it handles the physics acceleration that way, but the results were green and a little bit broken. So yeah, this game is unfortunately a no-go on the dual GPU setup. When implemented correctly into the game, PhysX provides great atmospheric immersion and eye candy as demonstrated by the Batman games, Alice and Mafia 2. On the other hand, the Metroid games already have great effects works built into their game engines that are platform agnostic. The PhysX effects on those games feel redundant and don't add all too much. Today, PhysX is pretty much gone, and existing up-to-date versions run fine on the CPU, so hardware-accelerated PhysX is stuck in this niche point in time for a few games. If you primarily use an AMD GPU, and if you happen to have an Nvidia card of this vintage somewhere in a box and don't mind troubleshooting a few errors here and there, then you might have fun playing through your backlog of PhysX games. I certainly wouldn't want to play Batman games without the effect enabled. Finally, I want to briefly show a more immediately useful capability of the GTX 465, and that is its rather great analog output capability. I have here this Philips CRT monitor built around 2005, and this thing can go up to 1920 by 1440p at 60 Hz. It can also go up to 160 Hz at low resolutions such as 640 by 480, though I found the sweet spot to be around 1440 by 1080p at 75 Hz for day-to-day usage. I mainly use this monitor for running the real antique DOS games and find that the image quality is far superior to my 1440p IPS panel using integer scaling. Here are some examples of Warcraft 2, Ultima Underworld, and Alone in the Dark. I captured the footage using my phone camera, so the quality is not exactly what the human eye perceives, but it looks superb in real life when the room itself is in low light conditions. I also wanted to see how Fallout 4 would look on a CRT. I think that idea is somehow correct in my head. And weirdly enough, I did get the weapon debris option to show up, but going in game, I didn't notice any special effects on weapon impacts. And my frame rate was going down horribly, so I don't think I got the option to work properly. I'm not surprised though, Bethesda games being able to run and function on any computer feels like a minor miracle with each passing year. I really hope you enjoyed this pseudo follow-up video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Please take care of yourselves and goodbye.